Men can do bizarre things out of desperation, but these morons pulled off the weirdest things to have ever happened in the history of the show, and this first guy will make your jaw drop. I've been covering a ton of oddballs who featured on the show over the last couple of weeks, but the ones I'll be talking about today were ready to go to any length to get what they want. Some of them are so crazy that it seems kind of unreal. Let's start with this weirdo who was caught in the Fairfax County sting back in the day when the team was just setting up their base, which means the cops were still not part of the ongoing investigation, and the burden of dealing with the bunch of losers was entirely on the production house. And let me tell you, it's not an easy job to pin down mudheads in the absence of law enforcement. However, the production team was determined, and this determination was met with an equal and opposite force named John Michael Kennelly. Of course, every man who is caught on the show is a specimen of his own kind, but this one was different. Kennelly left quite the impression on everybody with his odd behavior and even weirder activities. A lot of them came and a lot more left, but Kennelly is someone who will forever be remembered for doing the weirdest thing to have ever been recorded in the history of the show. Although Kennelly went by the screen name Special Guy 29, there was nothing really special about him. After showing hell of a lot of interest in the boy he had gotten in touch with online, Kennelly decided to take the next step. He expressed his deep desire to become a boyfriend and explicitly talked about the things he would like to do with the boy. Kennelly then continued the conversation and claimed that he was a 29-year-old prep school teacher who taught kids from the 11th grade. It was not until much later that Kennelly's real age surfaced. This jerk was actually 43 at the time of the sting and wasn't even employed. It's pretty clear that this moron was ready to lie at the blink of an eye to get what he wanted. But since he came across as a pretty no-nonsense kind of guy, the team decided to play along with his stupidity. However, nobody expected him to take a passing joke seriously. Just how far would this man go to try and date a boy who he shouldn't even be talking to? Trust me, the entire team's jaws hit the floor when they saw this. Ooh la la, that's more like a treat to sore eyes. Jokes aside, I think of all the weirdos to have ever been featured on the show, none of them were as devoted as this guy. I mean, this guy was ready to go to any lengths to please his partner. People talk about shedding the ego before you start a relationship, but this one decided to shed his clothes. Now, before you start laughing, let me remind you, this must be quite a significant move from his side. Why else would he do it otherwise? And to think of it, Kennelly had barely spoken to the boy for about an hour, and he already decided to make him his boyfriend. This guy is goals, man. Just look at the level of commitment. It's just oozing out of his bare skin and dumb face. And damn, does this guy have any restraint at all? At the time, the Watchdog organization did not have much experience, as it was only their second sting, and they had no idea how things would play out in real life. Had they known, I don't think they would have asked the loser to strip before entering the house. Yeah, they actually asked him to. In fact, everyone on board thought Kennelly was joking when he mentioned that he did not wear inners in order for him to strip. Coming from a 43-year-old, this statement is screaming out that this moron had some major malfunction inside his head. As Kennelly arrived on the scene, he was seen carrying a 12-pack along with him. The man then proceeds to enter the house via the garage, and this is where he did something you wouldn't believe.
At one point, the decoy said something about, what would be really hot.
Kennelly was finally down to wearing nothing but socks. He then walks right in, and nope, he did not even need any kind of invitation before he barged right in and took his place on the stool. I have no idea what was running through his head, but those few milliseconds of silence that passed between Chris and Kennelly in the room alone is epic. And no matter how many times I replay this next clip, it never fails to get me.
Could you explain yourself?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead and cover up.
Certainly. I'm sorry.
What's going on here?
This must be one of the most unforgettable "what's going on here" moments from the show. Chris could barely look at him with a straight face. I'm surprised how he maintained his composure, because this was a true test of self-control. For this loser who came to meet a boy and have some fun, things ended up being disgustingly embarrassing. I mean, if getting caught red-handed was not enough, imagine what it's like to get caught like this. While Chris started firing questions like he normally would, Kennelly was still trying to come to terms with what had just happened. While the only few words that left his his mouth were "I'm sorry," Kenneally's mind was rushing through all the possibilities of who the towering man was. Was it the boy's father? Or maybe this was the boy himself? I mean, when Kenneally could lie about his age, anyone could, right? So what's the safest thing to do when you're stuck in such a dire situation?
Your son IM'd me, and he told me to come on over.
He IM'd you.
Yes.
Damn right! Just go ahead and blame the person who isn't around. Kenneally assumed that should be a good enough excuse to get himself out of the sticky situation. But was it? Once the cameras popped up, Kenneally decided to stay mum. There was no point talking back, and I'm glad he realized that. When it was finally time to leave, Chris had to remind him of something really important. I don't think any other idiot has been through this level of humiliation on this show. There was no need for the cops in this case. What happened back in the Sting House should be a good enough lesson to never repeat such an offense again. But this is where things get weirder. Literally less than 24 hours later, Kenneally was caught in the same bait once again. At this point, I don't know whether I should feel bad for him or laugh my arse off. As for Chris, he was in disbelief.
We've been through this before. What are you doing?
This time around, Kenneally was charged with a 2-year suspended prison sentence, 3 years of probation, and a lifetime registration as a offender. Phew, that must have served him right. I don't think he's ever going to attempt something like this again, but that's how normal people react. And there was nothing normal about this guy. Kenneally was once again the prime suspect in a case where he apparently flashed 2 young girls in public and ran into the woods. But if you thought that was weird, what happened in this next episode was even crazier.
I gotta do something I can't do that. Oh my God.
For this entry, let's head over to the Bowling Green, Kentucky Sting, where the team had landed a new catch named Lauren Armstrong. After moving from Cambridge, Maine to Nashville, Tennessee, right off the bat, Armstrong got busy. While most people would take time to familiarize themselves with a new neighborhood and settle down, Armstrong was into something else. The first thing he wanted to do was to reach out to all the fresh faces that he could meet and perhaps even date someday. The only problem being the age factor of his target group. The thing that sets Armstrong apart from the other men on this list is that Armstrong was very good at convincing people. This was a very dangerous skill, since Armstrong could talk anyone into anything. He was so manipulative that when he started his conversation with a girl who went by the screen name of Kayla Princess 94 and almost immediately started posing as the ideal guardian savior. He portrayed himself to be a man whom she could trust, and even told her that if she didn't have any friends, he was glad to be one. He also backed up the statement by saying that he himself had 2 nieces whom he was very fond of, and who doesn't like to be pampered. Armstrong went to great lengths to make sure that the girl felt comfortable with everything. He started off by discussing Kayla's relationships and educating her on the dangers of weird men online. This is quite hypocritical since Armstrong didn't consider himself as one. Just how narcissistic was this guy? Armstrong was surprised when he heard that the girl had a boyfriend, but the 2 of them hadn't done anything yet. Soon, Armstrong was head over heels for Kayla and specifically told her that he was in love with her innocence. I guess he was finally coming to the point. Armstrong continued to chat with Kayla and urged her to experiment with herself. Now this might sound like a lot, but just 2 hours into the conversation, Armstrong was desperately trying to get closer to the real deal. For the next 2 months, Armstrong played it slow and steady, taking his time to gain the girl's confidence. And finally, when the time was right, the man started to detail everything that he had planned to do with the girl. First up came the proposal.
I wish I could marry you right now, because I would do it.
He clearly stated that if he had the chance, he would kidnap her and take her to his place in Nashville, where he would love her whether she liked it or not. And to assert his position further, he had the strangest way to address her. This man had some horrifying ideas. Finally, on his 37th birthday, Armstrong decided that it was time for him to drive down and meet Kayla, something he had been craving for over a month. He even brought Kayla a lovely present, a bracelet. After entering the house, Armstrong got comfortable on the massage chair and almost immediately started to woo the girl.
Like it, I dyed it by myself.
I think it's pretty.
Thank you.
It's very pretty.
But before things started getting touchy, Chris decided to storm right in. And in his possession were the chat logs that would soon reveal yet another shocking detail.
I'll tell you, for the last several days, you've been up to a lot.
You're a pretty prolific chatter there.
You see, Armstrong's chat log was so long that it spanned over 408 pages, something which ardent fans today dearly refer to as the holy lornography. And the extent of explicit content in those pages is beyond any normal person's imagination. Just as Chris was decoding the chat logs, Armstrong dropped a bomb that left Chris confused. Yeah, so Armstrong wanted us to believe that because he was taken for a ride in a previous relationship, it stemmed out of chatting online, and the only way he thought of getting back was to do the same thing with someone else. Tit for tat. How cool is that? Well, not so cool anymore when you're sentenced to 7 years in prison with additional probation and rehab classes, which he promptly failed to attend. Where's the weird part though? Well, here it comes. After his release, Armstrong curiously started a YouTube channel, which he believed would skyrocket since his short-lived fame on the show. Talk about being an opportunist. He actually thought that his time on television gained him fame. This clown from Boston was once again arrested in 2019 for violating his parole and not having any sort of remorse towards his actions, even after spending a whopping 5 years in prison. Guess some people never learn. But this next man might be the most dangerous man to have ever been featured on the show. But guess what? He was also just as weird. How weird? This one will leave you in splits.
I have walked from Pomona.
The final man to have the honor of making it to this list is a man who had been charged with several cases spanning all the way from his childhood days. Jean-Pierre Wary's life itself was a roller coaster that kept going up and down. Although he did fall in love a couple of times, he couldn't really settle down with anyone. I mean, how could he? This dude's entire life has been in and out of jail for offenses that even included individuals. When the team landed Wary while scouting for the next weirdo online, they had no idea what was in store. Wary had started a conversation with a bait named Luke, who was set up by the Watchdog organization. At the time of the chats, the 48-year-old had started the conversation all the way from a public library under the email address I'mMichaelWiltz@yahoo.com. Wary approached this account with absolutely no fear. Unlike other men on the show, Wary directly got into what he wanted even before trying to get to know the boy. This was concerning since this meant that Wary was either very impatient or he just didn't care. After a quick background check, the crew realized that they had to be extra careful since this man was no joke. Considering his history, this man was bound to be careful, and that's exactly what you can see in this next clip. Probably that's the cue to show up in his line of work, but it didn't work with the person he was here to meet. Since the team was prepared for his arrival, an actor posing to be Luke called out to Wary from behind a wall inside the house. But here's the big twist. The actor was a woman who could closely mimic a younger person's voice. Quite impressive. But was it enough to get Wary inside the house? It looks like it worked. Now take some time to get a good look at this guy, y'all. This guy looked like he was ready for a hike. What was he hiking though? Mount Everest? The man looked absolutely weary. But is that going to deter him from his goal of approaching Luke?
Yeah.
Hey, just gotta fix right now.
Wary was in a hurry. If not for Chris's intervention, he would have scooped up poor little Luke in no time. Let's pitch in a little background here. During his chats, Wary told Luke that he was a promotional photographer and was in town to film a hot movie. This is where things get weird. Wary claimed that he needed Luke's help in order to complete his work and even offered to feature him in his works. But there was a catch. Luke would have to succumb to a casting couch moment, not just with Wary, but also a few other men. When Chris started to question him, Wary was as calm as still water. And when he finally opened his mouth, he turned the entire story upside down.
And who were you looking for? John Peterson. John?
As the conversation pursued on, Wary started to get more and more convinced with his own story. One weird answer followed another, as Chris continued to grill the puffy old man.
So you thought you were going to come to a job interview at this home at 11:28 at night?
I was going to leave a note.
So here we have a man who wants Chris to believe that he came all the way, halfway by bus and the other half walking, just to meet a random guy he didn't even know, only because somebody else gave him his number, whose name he also doesn't know. And for what was he doing all this? Just to leave a small little note. If only people were as dedicated as this in real life. But no matter what, Wary did not budge from his extravagant lie. And so Chris decided to cut the crap and reveal his true identity. And this is where we usually see some sort of reaction from the weirdos. But Wary was some other creature. His stare was haunting.
Is say.
Once Wary left the house, he was rounded up by the cops, and once again, the story got twisted. The cop was bewildered, and his reaction is pretty legit. This weirdo had narrated a detailed and very intricate story, and after all that, who the hell is Scott now? Weirdos like this one never fail to surprise me, but who knows? Maybe there are bigger morons out there. And this weirdo right here did something so crazy that Chris was having none of it.
And who knows? Who knows what? We can do it if it clicks.
No. Well, yeah.
I haven't even gotten to the main part of the episode, and I already know where this is heading. According to this creepo's chats, he wanted to do a lot of things with the girl, and he pretty much generalized it by saying that he wanted to her. But little did he know that the only game he'll be playing is with the cops, and boy are they waiting for you with open arms. And he was here to give the girl he was meeting some much needed training in life skills. At least that's what he felt. But let's talk about the girl in question for a bit. I mean, just look at her, so calm and composed. I know she's an actor who's just pretending to be this naive girl, but even so, these weirdos are very real, and it takes guts to actually stand there and face them despite knowing all the running through their heads. When this sicko arrived, the girl tried her best to make the moron comfortable, and by the looks of it, he truly enjoyed all the attention. When things started to go the way he wanted, Eugene got into the main stuff. Now, listen to him real close.
Try to get you excited.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Have you done that kind of stuff before?
I just love this guy's confidence. Just look at him going on, and about what he planned to do with the... What was he thinking? That he was the only physical trainer that she ever needed in her life? But this sicko made sure to clear things up. He said that this time, he wasn't gonna go all the way. He was someone who liked to go slow and steady. As for now, he only wanted to get her excited. And apparently, he knew exactly what to do. By the looks of it, this weirdo is in for the long run. He didn't want to be over and done in a day. He wanted to keep coming back so he could keep teaching her some new tricks of the trade. Now, I've been covering a ton of these guys on my channel, but not many have asked the girl who was willing to go through with it. Maybe it was just the reassurance he needed to satisfy his own pride. Something like, damn, I'm so cool that a girl doesn't mind hooking up with me kind of vibe. But out of nowhere, the man admitted something really big.
I'm more scared than you are, to be honest.
What are you scared of?
Yep, Eugene was actually scared of the consequences. He knew he shouldn't be here, and yet he simply couldn't hold himself back from coming. So basically, this is exactly why he was being so careful. What if he had to bail out right in the middle of the act? It was better to take his own time, win the confidence of the girl, and then get into the real deal. In fact, during the conversation, this bozo actually blurted out that he didn't even think the girl was real until he met her. Damn right, man, she isn't actually. But Eugene had to find out the hard way.
That's your father?
How you doing?
Okay. This the police?
What's going on?
Sadly, Chris had to interrupt a beautiful evening by the beach and screw up Eugene's life forever. As usual, Chris wasted no time and got right into business. And how did this weirdo act?
I knew this was a setup, so I told it was the police.
All his fears had just come alive. He had his doubts all through the way, and even during the conversation with the girl. But it's a different thing when you're actually caught red-handed. Eugene immediately tensed up. He started pacing around out of restlessness and got so frantic that all he wanted to do was to scoot off. But before that, he had to make his stance clear. He kept insisting that he wasn't here to do anything, and that's exactly what he told the girl as well. But did he forget that he was the one who proposed the baby steps that they would take together towards Wonderland? Somehow I find that most weirdos suddenly suffer from a short-term memory loss as soon as they get caught. Want to see more proof? Watch this.
How old are you?
43.
43.
I mean, sorry, 53, sorry.
53.
53, I'm sorry.
Now you said 49.
You see what I mean? He even messed up his freaking age. Between 43, 53, 49, how old was this guy really? Chris was on the verge of flipping out. Cause how much can you lie at the end of the day? The TV presenter then started to read the chat logs aloud. And what you're about to hear next is simply disgusting.
Believe it, I knew.
You talk about her being the you never had.
Oh no, he didn't. How can you even talk like that? How can you have the heart to actually call someone your daughter and then walk right into her arms? Jeez, there is no more decency left in this world. Chris is normally a very calm and composed person. No matter how much some of these sickos trigger him, he tries to keep his cool. But there was something about this interaction that was pissing him off. I mean, he actually said she could be his daughter. What kind of person talks like that? When the weirdo kept throwing his hands up and repeating that he knew it was all a setup, Chris lost it.
Then why did you do it? Help me to understand.
I don't know.
Eugene was having a panic attack, but Chris didn't want to let him go as of yet. There was another important issue that he had to bring up, and Chris was not gonna let him go before he asked him this.
Talk in the chat about you can only come over a half hour because you got to pick up your wife.
I wasn't gonna. I was saying.
Where's your wife?
Had it been for me, I would have just pushed him into the water. I mean, he actually kept his wife waiting at work, and this is what he was up to while she struggled for the family? Is this man even real? At this point, there was nothing much left to talk about, and it was time to hand over this loser to the right people.
As he leaves the beach, police come running towards him.
Down.
Eugene was immediately transported to the nearest interrogation center, where he pleaded guilty to attempt a vile act on a. For all the drama that he staged, Eugene received lifetime parole supervision and a lifetime on the offender's registry. But how did this guy escape jail time? Well, don't worry, because sometime later, Eugene was arrested again for violating the conditions of his parole, and this time, he got what he truly deserved. He was out behind bars for 12 whole months. But this next weirdo said something so absurd that it drove Chris nuts. And I mean bonkers. Okay, fair warning, but the moment I saw this guy, I felt like knocking him out of his senses. Can anyone be so disgusting? The man I'm talking about is Corey Edgar, a 32-year-old jerk whose screen name was just as vile as him. So this weirdo, who went by the screen name Rick's Talented Tongue, approached a girl online and, without wasting any time, got into the crux of the matter. Well, of course he had his own doubts and suspected it was some kind of undercover operation. But hey, how could he hold himself back from hitting up this girl? The man was more than eager to share a few pictures of his big guy with the girl. And what's more, he even asked her if she could help him put his equipment to good use. From there, the chat gets even more graphic, so much that I can't even share a gist of it here. However, the man was fully aware what he was doing would land him in trouble, and so hatched a plan. He threw a fit about how he would never approach anyone, and then even threatened to report the girl to the police for trying to entice him. He even sent a pretty harsh message that screamed out, "Leave me alone!" For a few seconds there, I thought, okay, maybe this guy was genuine, and maybe he was serious. Even if he wasn't, none of the crew members expected him to show up again. He was a done deal, and they'd probably have to look for another catch. But Corey decided to pop up again. He was back, and this time he wanted proof before he continued his conversation. Proof of what? Proof of the girl being real, and proof of the girl being really young. Could the crew disappoint him? Of course not. They set up a phone call, and it looks like Corey took the bait.
Nobody's here. My parents are gone.
Was that enough to convince him? A few hours later, Corey showed up at the Sting house, and although he was eager to invite himself inside, there was something that was still holding him back.
Where are you going?
This weirdo had already made it this far, but he couldn't make up his mind if he should actually go through with the plan or just take off. He was so suspicious that he didn't even step inside the house, but instead kept weighing his options standing right at the door. Well, make up your mind already. We don't have all day, plus who knows? There may be another weirdo just like you lurking in the corner somewhere. Finally, after giving it a long thought, Corey entered the house, and the first thing he did was to scan the entire place down. Now, I've seen some really suspicious men before, but this guy was FBI. I mean, he wasn't convinced till he scanned the hell out of the place. And just then, he spotted the camera crew, and bang!
You are a suspicious guy, Rick.
I told you there's people here.
Wait up, Corey, where did you think you're running off to? Corey had already done his bit of investigation, and now it was time for Chris to do his part. But Corey wasn't planning to give Chris the chance to. He wanted to bounce, and he wanted to bounce that very second. When Chris realized Corey might just escape, he changed the tone of his voice, and guess what? It worked! Have you ever seen Chris being so stern? Take a look at how the TV presenter commanded the loser to walk right back in.
I want to hear the whole story. So come on over here and have a seat.
Corey was well aware that his life was over. He kept repeating the same big thing over and over again like a broken record, whether he stepped out of the house or inside. Either way, he was done. But there was much that had to be discussed, and Chris wasn't letting him go anywhere before that. It was time to set things straight, but the only thing that Corey could say was this.
I did not want this to happen.
Chris wasn't here for the BS. He never is. All he wanted was a confession, and perhaps an apology apology for some of the actions committed by the weirdos like Corey. As for the excuses and all the drama that takes place, Chris couldn't care less about it. There were enough guys waiting right outside the house to take care of, but when Chris started to read from the transcripts, Corey started to act like a saint. He tried to explain how he too asked to be left alone and suspected that this whole thing was a setup. But the only thing that this did was to annoy Chris even further, and just when he think Corey might back down a bit, he grew impatient, and this ticked Chris off in the wrong way.
Then you show some reservations. I'm not arresting you.
Well, it looks like Corey already knew of the plan ahead. Whining and stomping his feet around had made no difference to his situation. But since he already knew he was going down, he decided to clean his name as much as possible. And so, he started this whole rant about how the girl kept luring him into meeting her, despite him not showing the interest to. But wait, wasn't he the only one who shared some really obscene pictures with the girl? There was no escaping that now. And so Corey decided to just be out with it. And he admitted to sharing the pictures. I mean, he had to, but he said that they weren't his. Then what was the fun in sharing it anyway? Come on, be a grown-arse man already. Just accept your faults and get going on your way. But Corey decided to play victim. He blamed the girl and outrightly said that he was innocent and was being played all throughout. When Chris heard this statement, he lost it.
It's not my fault. It's not her fault. Not your fault, Rick. You kept going with the conversation.
When Corey understood there was no way out of this, he started this whole story about how he was going fishing and just happened to stop by. And look where he was, being grilled for no mistake of his. But can you believe this man? Of course not. Well, he was fishing, but not for the right thing. When Chris revealed his true identity, Corey pretty much laid out what his future was gonna look like when he said this.
My family's done. They're waiting to arrest me. They're waiting to take me to jail.
And yes, he was right. The cops were waiting for him to step out of the house, but Corey wasn't in a mood to leave. He wanted to stall his arrest as much as possible, which is when Chris had to remind him of something important.
Maybe another good reason to go outside. But Rick, it's not going to help you to stay here any longer.
But Corey paid no heed to any of that. He shamelessly went ahead and poured himself a glass of the drink while Chris and the rest of the crew waited for him to have his fill. The nerve on this man, taking his own sweet time and chilling while the cops were waiting for him just outside. Had it been for me, I would have cuffed him right there. Why even wait till he left the house? But there were rules to be followed, and Chris had to this time sternly ask him to leave because this man was showing no signs of doing so. It looked like he was even ready to take a nap right there, but not this time. With no other option in sight, Corey left the house and readily surrendered to the cops.
Put your hands on your head.
Well, that was one hell of a weird encounter, but this next weirdo goes down as one of the strangest men Chris has ever met.
Making a mistake.
Making a mistake.
Marvin Lakin was made of something else. He is like no other weirdo you have ever seen on the show. It's safe to say that this dude's brain was wired differently. How differently really? You're about to find out. Most of the morons who show up at the Sting House usually come in to have one hell of a night and then leave. That's it. It's just a one-time thing. Once they were done with it, they simply moved on to the next. But Marvin had some other plans. He didn't want to be just another Tom, Dick, and Harry. He wanted to make a point. He wanted to prove that there was nobody in the world like him, and for this, he had to make sure that the girl he was meeting would never forget him. Marvin put his plan to work the day he struck a conversation with one of the members of the crew online. He started off with sharing some really explicit content, which ideally would have driven any innocent. Hey, yes, his imagination was that crazy. But Marvin was not done yet. He went into great detail of how he wanted to try out different in different rooms of the house. And what was the reason behind this? So the girl would remember him no matter which room she was in. He wanted to fill all the rooms of the house with the aroma of their sizzling chemistry. But did he have it in him? Meanwhile, the girl played along and nurtured all of his fantasies. But she had a request to make as well. Marvin would be allowed to do as he pleased, if and only if he did just one thing: walk into the house with nothing on. The crew assumed it was too much to ask, because what kind of crazy man would agree to something as insane as this? They expected him to put an end to the conversation and head off in the opposite direction. But Marvin surprised everyone, or rather should I say shocked, because this is how he appeared at the Sting House.
Where are you?
Why just take a seat?
Now that's just vile. This man was ready to do anything just to get steamy and hot with a He couldn't wait any longer now that he was here and started to walk towards the voice of the girl. But then the door opened. Somebody else happened to tower over him.
You want to explain yourself? Grab that towel right there, please.
Chris was in a deep state of shock. He couldn't believe his eyes. How could anyone actually be so desperate? And to make things worse, Marvin actually admitted that something else would have happened if Chris hadn't ruined his plans. But when Marvin tried to explain that he wouldn't have gone all the way, Chris lost it.
I wasn't going. You went all the way when you took your clothes off.
What's even worse is that Marvin wanted the girl to perform a few disgusting acts on a freaking cat. With this guy, Chris was over and done with him even before he got into the details of the chat logs. Someone as vile as Marvin didn't deserve any more time from the crew. It was better to pack him off, as just sharing the room with him was making life insufferable. What this weirdo brought along will leave you in shock.
You here?
Okay, first up, here comes a 20-year-old student who is studying at the Salt Lake City Community College in Utah. Considering he featured on the show, you can take it for granted that this loser screwed his life up forever. Sebastian Rodriguez should have ideally been at college working on his assignments, but sadly, he had another project in mind. When Sebastian started chatting up with the girl, he wanted to make sure he came across as a very approachable person. He not only lied about his age, but also went under the alias Chris, just to strike a better balance with the girl on the other side. It was only after the girl said that she was looking for someone older did Sebastian reveal his real age. When the loser arrived at the house, Sebastian welcomed himself in with great confidence. He started to look for the girl who could only be heard at the time. When he started to walk towards the direction of the voice, wait a minute, who the hell is that lurking from behind? Was he part of the crew? Or perhaps a cameraman looking for a better shot? Neither. This dude had actually tagged along with Sebastian. Yes, this was Sebastian's partner in crime, David Mackick. And before either of them could scoot off, Chris decided to step in.
Okay, come right over here, please. Right over there.
What we had here were two birds in a bush, and mind you, this was going to turn out to be a really thorny, prickly bush. Right from the get-go, Chris wasted no time to get down to business. While Sebastian looked like his soul had been flushed out of his body, David was barely fazed by the situation. He was so much at ease that anyone could easily pass him off as one of the members of the crew. When Chris got down to questioning, he first confirmed Sebastian's credentials, and then he moved on to David, asked him his side of the story.
And who are you?
Oh, I'm just the tag along.
Yeah, he's just my friend.
Just the tag along. What's your name?
David.
Yep, washed his hands off right there, just like that. He actually sounded more like, don't get anywhere near my boss, I'm just the tag-along. I don't even know what I'm doing here. Well, like as if. Honestly, Chris isn't dumb to believe that. David did tag along, but he was obviously aware of what he was tagging along for. By this time, you can see both the weirdos display different ways of exhibiting anxiety and restlessness. Sebastian was biting the hell off his nails, and David, he had a rather peculiar way to handle stress by constantly sipping on his drink. At this point, Chris was intrigued. I mean, he's seen some really vile men, but this was just pissing him off. In order to get him to stop, Chris tried to bring the focus on David and asked him this.
What are you drinking there?
No beer. Rockstar.
So it's just an energy drink then?
Yeah. It looks like Mr. Tagalong is just going to stick to his drink for a little longer. Meanwhile, Sebastian started to beat around the bush. He first denied knowing the age of the girl, but when he found Chris holding up the transcripts in his hand, the weirdo gave up trying. As for David, he tried to shun down all the questions fired at him with just one reply. I'm just a tag-along. Well, sure you are, but you did come, didn't you? However, David was in for a big shock as well. When Chris revealed the age of the girl Sebastian was here to meet, David's expression is thoroughly worth watching.
Oh, she said.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no way anyone can fake a reaction like that. David was stunned. He was probably thinking, what the heck am I doing here? Yes, David knew exactly what he was here for. He was here to pitch in and have some fun for himself too, but he didn't know with whom. As for Sebastian, he had no idea how to react while his arse was being fired. Should I sit? Should I stand? Should I run away? Or should I just die? Sebastian's mind was bombarded with several things that could happen with him. And finally, he mustered up the courage to ask Chris this.
Am I in trouble, sir?
And the silence? That's one hell of a class act right there, Chris. For someone who's going through a panic attack, Chris only made it worse for Sebastian by giving him the silent treatment. You have to agree that it's quite tormenting to just think about the different possibilities of what might happen as opposed to straight up being informed of the consequences. And that's exactly what was eating Sebastian up from the inside. While Chris continued to grill him and brought up the issue of the drinks and of course the pack of protection he'd brought along for what was to be a fun night, David in the background was enjoying the show. Considering how much David was bothered about Sebastian getting caught in the act, I wonder what kind of relationship these guys shared, because this dude simply didn't care. And I'm guessing Chris too had the same question, to which Sebastian said this.
How come you brought your tag along?
Because I just brought him because I wasn't going to do anything, sir. I just wanted him to come with me.
Well, they definitely are not friends, that much I know. Did they just meet or something? One of the viewers commented saying Sebastian probably couldn't get the hard drinks by himself, and so asked David to help him out since he was older. Either way, since David was here, he was bound to be answerable in the eyes of the law, but that's not what happens.
And if not, you're obviously free to go.
Great, thanks a lot, sir. I'm just a tag.
When Chris asked them to leave, the relief that washed over Sebastian's face was palpable. It was like a new lease of breath was filled into his life all over again. But that relief would only last till he reached the exit, as there was someone waiting to get a good hold of him. As for the tag, he was happy that the ordeal was finally over. And so was his drink. Well, you can poke all the fun you want at this guy, but this is what pissed Chris to the core. He was mad that Sebastian got someone he hardly knew along with him to meet a girl who was really young. He not only got someone, but also got enough drinks and protection for both of them. But this is what makes the sting even crazier. David might be the only guy on the show who showed up at the sting and left without getting involved in any sort of investigation. Thereafter, Sebastian was moved to the nearest police headquarters, where he was booked and sentenced to 36 months in prison. And David, he moved on in life, got married, and had a bunch of kids. Do you think letting David go was a mistake? Just think of it this way. What if Chris wasn't there at the house that day? What do you think these two guys would have been up to? Would David have still continued to be a tag, or would he have joined Sebastian in going all the way? I guess we'll never know. But here comes another weirdo. And this one right here was so disgusting that Chris simply lost it when he read the transcripts.
Father-son. Father-son?
Yes.
So this is the grandpa you don't want in your life, because this old man right here is actually the next weirdo on our list for today. Charles Harding, or simply Chuck, was all of 65 years old, but for some reason, he did not act his age. Chuck's chat with the boy he was in contact with online from the team might go down as one of the most disgusting chats to have ever been exchanged in the history of the show. When Chuck got in touch with the boy somewhere down the line, he got so engrossed in his dirty thoughts that he could not help himself but get all the demographics of the boy's body. The worst of the chat is still to come, but let me quickly show you a glimpse of what happened when Chuck made it to the Sting house.
Hey, how are you?
Okay.
Why don't you have a seat right around that stool there for me?
Aw, it looks like the poor old grandpa's age finally got to him. I mean, just take a look at his reaction. Chuck was startled. He was expecting a puny little boy, but here comes a tall 6-foot gentleman all suited up from head to toe. So how do you get out of a sticky situation like this? Just lie the hell out of it till you get out. And that's exactly what Chuck decided to do. Would it work in his favor?
Talk to him, possibly.
I know, this weirdo couldn't even talk properly. He was barely able to even voice his thoughts. And yet, here he was trying to pull off an entirely different performance for the day. You'd think he had it in him to pull it off. Anyway, if you couldn't make out a thing of what he said, let me help you out. So apparently, there was this gentleman who called Chuck over because Chuck was selling a house. Wow, I have to give it to him. This was quite the storyteller. And mind you, his story is full of twists and turns. This man sure had a way with his words. But will it help him out of this mess he's in? When Chris started to read from the chats, good old Chuck could not believe what was happening. But did he know it? Nope. The man sat so still that it was hard to read his face. And when he finally opened his mouth, out came another hideous lie.
Well, I have another person that uses my computer.
Another person.
Yep, why not? I mean, anyone could use your computer. Totally get it. But why is it that you are the one who showed up at the Sting house? When Chris continued to read the transcript, you can see how poetic Chuck really was. When the boy asked him if he was rich, this is how he replied.
No, son. Rich only in love I have and the care for you.
Wow, precious words. But what kind of care, really? The man wanted to do everything right, from sizing up stuff to feeling it and caressing it till it ran dry. But what this weirdo reveals next made Chris lose his head.
Military travel agency for 5 years, and then I was a government employee with the Navy.
Yep, this man had worked not only for the Air Force, but also for the church in the past. And after all that, this is what he was doing? When nothing else worked, he finally admitted that he was the one who had chatted up with the boy. And well, the boy was in a gay chat room. So what was wrong with a little harmless chat? Again, just like he did earlier, he conveniently forgot about the boy's age. Well, I didn't really expect anything better from him anyway, but it's scary how many people this man would have come across in his whole life and the kind of things he would have done with them. I bet this wasn't his first rodeo. All we have to do is just scan his browsing history, and I'm not going to be surprised if I find a ton of other illicit chats in there. But Chris had a more pressing question to ask.
Do you know that it's illegal to send obscene material?
You can see how Chris was minutes away from punching this loser's face. What this weirdo was here to do could have left an innocent person scarred for life. But apparently, this Gramps would have bailed out if the boy met the following criteria.
If, I felt uncomfortable and I felt that he was, not...
Just forget about everything, okay? The very fact that the boy was simply not old enough should have been enough reason for Chuck to say his goodbyes. Chris definitely gave him a good earful. And in one of his podcasts, he even mentioned that just having Chuck around literally disgusted him. This man is clearly rotting in hell right now. But this next weirdo was bowled over the moment he stepped inside the house. Wondering why? The reason behind his reaction is shocking.
Come here and have a seat. No.
I knew that.
You know what?
I know.
Sit down, please.
Okay.
Keith Williams was beaming with confidence when he walked up the driveway and invited himself inside the Sting house. But everything changed the moment he saw Chris. Of course, finding another grown man in the house as opposed to the person they had been talking to is upsetting. But Keith's reasons were different.
Can I give an interview?
You're not going to give an interview.
Keith actually refused to give an interview, which means he clearly knew Chris was here for one. Well, that's only because this wasn't Keith's first time. It was just another house, another setup, but the same old weirdo caught in the same old trap. You know how the crew lines up one weirdo after another at the same Sting house, right? Well, that's sadly how many there are out in the streets. So Keith showed up a little too early, and he actually drove past another loser getting arrested right in front of the house. He actually saw the entire climax of the Sting happening live in front of his eyes. But despite that, Keith wanted to take his chances. When he called the girl for a quick update on what was happening, he was told that it was some random thing that the cops had latched onto. So he waited for the cops to leave, and then circled right back into getting himself arrested. Talk about being desperate. But this is the reason Keith went through all the trouble.
Bored. Honestly, look at my eyes. I just,
What on earth? Bored? How can you even be this bored in life? Really? Have you got nothing else to do? Heard of anything called friends? Hobbies? Just chilling out maybe? No. Imagine if every bored person on the face of the earth shows up at random places like this. What do you make of a world like that? The sooner we pack such idiots away, the better. Because having them around is just no good. But this weirdo tried his best to talk himself out of the mess he was in.
Anyway, I'll get rid of it and I'll never touch a thing again. I'll go to meetings, whatever you need me to do.
Talk about being guilty. But what he did was to make Chris's job easier. Keith had just spilled the beans even before Chris got a chance to grill him. But when Chris held his ground and continued to read the horrendous transcripts, the weirdo had the craziest reaction I've ever seen.
Yeah, I'm wrong. Do you understand? I'm telling you I'm wrong.
This man is definitely getting on my nerves right now. And nope, not one small hint of guilt on his face. And when Chris brought up his past encounter in a similar episode from the crew's online history, this clown had only one thing to say.
Get me inside your mind. What's going on?
Just bored. I'm single. I'm bored.
To hell with your boredom, man. What kind of boredom is this? I mean, get a life, bro. Okay, one last try. Now the cameras are out, and Chris has also revealed his identity. But let's see if our man here will finally own his shit or not.
Drove by this house and saw police out front.
Yeah.
Yet you walked in here anyway.
Bored. Like I told you.
To hell with your boredom? Okay, let's just get rid of this bored soul and move on to this next weirdo who brought something so unexpected with him that for the first time ever, the crew had no idea what to do.
Oh no. He brought his son with him. He's got his child with him.
Yep, that's right. Clifford Wallach literally brought his kid along with him. This is not a play date for kids, buddy. Get that loud and clear inside your filthy head. How can a father even think of bringing his own child to commit such an offense? Apparently, he brought him along only because there was no one else to take care of him. Well, he could easily set another date with his online partner, or maybe even drop the kid off at a relative's. Or how about just giving up the whole idea, huh? No, that sounds more like it. I can't get over the trauma the kid must be experiencing right now. I will never be able to come to terms with this particular episode. And it's not just me. Everyone involved on that particular day was in for a shock they ever asked for. Just take a look at how ever so casually he's walking right inside the Sting house with this kid. What was the kid supposed to be doing while this man was at his game, huh? The crew had no idea what to expect from a man who would stoop as low as this maniac, and it goes without saying that Chris didn't want to waste any time either. There is no way this could play out like any other regular bust on the show. The crew had to be very careful with this one. They wanted to make sure that the man knew he was in trouble, but at the same time, not alarm the child in any way.
My point is, because your child is here, I think it'd be best if you just went ahead and left.
Chris got straight to business, and this is one sting he will never be proud of. The TV presenter was very brief with the confrontation and let him go almost immediately. Now, this was going to be a very different kind of arrest. Sadly, the kid, no matter how much they tried, had to witness the arrest of his father. And all Clifford could think about at the time was this.
Get arrested.
Please give me my son, please.
If you were so bothered about your child, you would never do something as disgusting as what brought you to the Sting house. You were not bothered about your kid, so stop putting up a show. In a podcast, Chris later shared this rather unusual experience and said that he despised Clifford for bringing the boy along. I'm sure the boy was old enough to understand what was happening, but one thing is for sure. Since this arrest was meant to go public, I hope the boy wasn't affected with the extent of humiliation on TV. So these were the weirdos Chris hated on the show, but who knows? There may be more weirdos out there who might show up with weirder things in the future.